So I want to turn our attention now and talk a little bit about some of the things that we as adults are dealing with. It's been a little more than 2 months now since we've been impacted by COVID-19. And I don't know about you, but I'm getting really tired. It's somewhat like a marathoner who hits the wall, usually at mile 20 or 21, where you experience a sudden attack of fatigue and you just lose all energy and you feel like you can't go on. I seem to have hit that wall this week. Just the accumulation of stressors, whether it's the stay at home and social isolation or the anxiety from just a grocery run, or the unpredictability and unknowns of our current plans and our future plans, and of course the ever-present danger of being exposed to the COVID-19 virus. And I don't know about you, but those daily Zoom meetings, all of that is taking a physical toll, a mental toll, and even a spiritual one. But I think what probably has broken my spirit the most have been all the stories of the human atrocities that have been perpetrated against other human beings. Now, as an Asian American woman, I'm especially aware of the escalation in verbal threats and physical violence against Asian Americans all across the country. Some of the incidences that are notable, among many, many others, are, for instance, the attack, the brutal stabbing of a Burmese father and his 2 and 6-year-old sons while they were shopping at a Texas Walmart, or the attack on a 39-year-old woman as she was putting out her garbage early one morning and someone jumped out and threw acid on her, and this took place in New York City. And this week alone, in our own backyard here in St. Paul, an older Asian American woman was waiting for the light rail, and 3 teenagers harassed her, and then one of them kicked her in the head. Racism is rearing its ugly head. It's always been present around us. But this prejudice, discrimination, and antagonism that's directed toward people and anyone who belongs to a particular race that is different than one's own, just based upon the belief that one race is better than the other, or based upon the belief that all people of a particular race must be the same. This discrimination is evil. It goes against the very heart of God's love for all his people. And unfortunately, racism is very real. It is present, it is current, and it is local. As we have seen and experienced the rise of anti-Asian American sentiments, attitudes, behaviors, and violence, I want you to know that the River Life Ministry team and we as a River Life body of believers, we stand together with our Asian American brothers and sisters. And we stand against, we do not take lightly or condone the racist attitudes, sentiments, verbal attacks, or physical violence against people of Asian American descent. I have no doubt that many of you, if not all of you, have been on the receiving end of some racist attitudes, words, and actions. The mental, emotional wall for me has come from feeling the crushing weight of the hate that is all around us in our fallen world. Also, adding to the crushing weight has been the release this week of the video of the brutal killing of Ahmaud Arbery that took place in February and only came to light this week, and the seemingly unjust police and judicial response to that killing. So Friday Christianity Today ran an article by Dante Stewart entitled Ahmaud Arbery and the Trauma of Being a Black Runner. Stuart tells the story of how one day last year, while he was out on his daily run, he ran by a house where a white man was standing on his porch, and the man was taking pictures of Stuart as he was running by. Stuart gave a verbal greeting to the man, but the man gave no answer and instead kept taking pictures of him. Stuart recalls how his fear turned into rage, and he writes, "But on that day last year, my rage turned into deep sadness. On the walk home, I stopped, bowed my head, and cried. These were not tears of weakness. I cried because I felt what many of those who looked like me have felt, the violence of an unloving world. He robbed me that day. He stole something from me in his cruelty." Stuart's words resonate with me. I too feel the deep sadness of the violence of an unloving world. Hatred, abuse of power, injustice, violence, and cruelty are demoralizing and life-draining. So what can we do? There was a time in my life when I would take a quarterly retreat where I would just take a day or two to be by myself, to write in my journal, and ultimately to cry a lot to God. It wasn't that crying was cathartic or that crying helped me physically or emotionally, but it was more important that I spend that extended time with God, just pouring my heart out to Him and telling Him all the joys and pains and struggles that I was currently experiencing. I needed to be real with God. I needed to lament. To lament is to express sorrow and grief. To lament is to go to God with all the frustrations, anger, pain, and sadness in our hearts. To lament is to turn towards God rather than dealing with pain and suffering and injustice on my own. Mark Rogop, in his article for desiringgod.org, entitled "Dare to Hope in God, How to Lament Well," he explains it this way. Lament prayers take faith. Talking to God instead of getting sinfully angry or embittered requires biblical conviction. Laying out the messy struggles of your soul and then asking again and again for God to help you requires a solid theological mooring. Laments turn toward God when sorrow tempts you to run from Him. Laments interpret the world through a biblical lens. I love that. Lament interprets the world through a biblical lens. Did you know that the Bible is full of laments? There's a whole book called Lamentations. And almost 1/3 of the 150 Psalms are laments in which the poet, songwriter cries out to God for help, expresses pain and sorrow and anger, and acknowledges God's power and love. In the face of racism, injustice, and hatred, we don't just stop at lamenting, but if we do not lament well, we can either move too quickly into insensitive minimalizing of the painful situation, or we can move into action with bitterness, hatred, and violence in our own hearts and behaviors. If life has felt difficult, heavy, frightening, uncontrollable, and even intolerable, I want to invite you to lament and to bring your worries and pains to God. I'm going to close by reading 8 verses from Psalm 25, which is a lament by King David. I invite you to prayerfully read it with me as the words come up, and we can bring our lament to God. In you, Lord my God, I put my trust. I trust in you. Do not let me be put to shame, nor let my enemies triumph over me. Turn to me and be gracious to me, for I am lonely and afflicted. Relieve the troubles of my heart and free me from my anguish. Look on my affliction and my distress and take away all my sins. See how numerous are my enemies and how fiercely they hate me. Guard my life and rescue me. Do not let me be put to shame, for I take refuge in you. May integrity and uprightness protect me, because my hope, Lord, is in you. Amen.